Hi, Kelly. Thanks so much for joining us here on the podcast today. I'm thrilled to have you with us.
No, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, so let's get right into your story. Could you share with our listeners maybe a little of your backstory? What led you to doing the work that you're doing today?
Yeah. So where do I start? I had been in the event industry and event production industry for a really long time. And then from owning my own boutique event planning and production company to working in other places and venues and catering and all across the board until I started educating and consulting in the event industry and speaking and all of those things. And then COVID.
Yeah.
So COVID obviously changed the wedding industry and the event industry in a very palpable way. I had clients calling me saying they lost $1 million overnight. And sort of through that process, by that time I had already felt like I needed a change and things were not going the way I wanted to. I was overwhelmed and I'd been doing so much speaking and traveling and all these things that I just needed, like I knew something needed to change, and COVID sort of gave me that gift.
Mhm.
And that I had the opportunity to spend time just working on myself. And that is how I ended up launching a soap business, a soap and bath and body products and, crystal and vintage sort of business. And that's how I ended up here today on your podcast, because our stories are so similar.
Right. It's fun. I actually haven't spoken to anyone who has such a similar story in terms of soap making. I've talked to other former educators, but I thought this would be fun. So we share a lot of parallels, and I actually wrote something down that I saw on your website that really resonated with me, and I wanted you to kind of speak to it a little bit. It says, for me, that looked like pushing the power button on my entire life and business. I did absolutely nothing. For over a year, I sat in silence, studying herbal medicine, energy healing, and high sensitivity. I read a lot of books, and I did a lot of soul searching. So I had, this immediately took me back to when I left my job in education, like really left. And actually it was just prior to leaving, but I had taken a summer and decided I was working in higher education. So I was often working during the summer, but I said I was not going to work all summer and I was going to just explore me and learn how to relax basically. And I dove into everything. I was turning 40 and I said, if anybody wants to get me a gift family wise, please get me like a massage or reflexology or something I've never done. And I'm going to try everything. And that's what I did. I was, foot reflexology, an essential oil class, everything. I just did it all summer. And that's really what made this big pivot for me. So yours looked a little bit different, but could you maybe talk about this, what I had just read there and how that was kind of transformational for you?
Yeah, so I was at the height of my business actually when COVID kind of changed things. And early COVID, I was really working hard as an educator and online persona and, expert to help people to get, their business in a place where it was COVID safe and, all those things. So, but I was just killing myself trying to get enough content out there. And I just came to this place where I was like, I'm done. Like I did everything, I've served everything, I've done everything. And like, now I need to worry about my family and, my needs. I was caring for an uncle that had lung cancer, and so I had to work really hard not to get COVID because, all of these other things that were going on. And so at that time, I just literally shut everything down. I just closed my laptop pretty much. I mean, that's an extreme. I didn't quite go that far, but closed my laptop and set it all down and just allowed myself the freedom to be slow and adopted sort of slow living practices. And through that, I found things like herbalism, but that was also how I found what it means to be a highly sensitive person.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, once I learned that, I started just devouring it. It was like, oh my goodness. And I just read everything I possibly could. And what I realized is that in my consulting and education business, I was already serving highly sensitive people. I was already working with them. I just didn't know that I was working with them. Was already attracting them. And through the creative industry, I would say probably 50 to 60% of people in the creative industry are also highly sensitive. So it was very easy to take those two things that I loved. I still love consulting and working with people. I knew I needed to go deeper to be more fulfilled. And so I was able to take HSP and put that business consulting with HSP. And then through COVID, I started like, I don't know, what happens if I put this crystal, this thing I love, into some soap and like use it? And I started taking herbalism and mixing it with soap and Bath and Body. And what I actually created ends up is, I still have them as two, but right now I'm working on putting them together, is a way that I heal myself and have an abundance or a spillover, a manifestation of how others can heal themselves through these things that I create. And then also this business consulting arm that still helps businesses to reset and to become more sensitive as business owners. So we're sort of pulling those things together now as I'm working more and more on pulling them together. But I get to do both, which is really exciting and fulfilling for me. And literally there's nothing better than touching the plants and touching the medicine and touching it. It's so healing for me. And then I can take that overflow into my business consulting side.
Yeah, and that was really my next question. I wanted to hear about your business consulting. And this kind of, I guess, flows over into being a highly sensitive person. I am 110% sure that I am as well. I just always have been. I always consider myself overly sensitive. Can you talk a little bit about, I guess, what that is for someone who might not recognize that in themselves? And because there is a lot to read about it, there's probably a lot that I have not read about it. And there are probably people out there listening who are wondering if they are as well. So maybe talk about what that is and how you came to really discover that you were.
Yeah. So a highly sensitive person, or what's called sensory processing sensitivity, was a personality trait that was sort of discovered as a strange word, but sort of like brought to light by a psychologist named Elaine Aron. Her work can be found easily online. And that work was originally published actually as far back as 1990, believe it or not. And so the content is available for reading, but in general, what the personality trait includes is that people that are highly sensitive I'm going to give like 4 basic traits. Mm-hmm. They have a higher depth of processing, or like a deeper depth of processing. So like anything that comes into your orbit energetically, mentally, physically, your body processes it longer and deeper, right? So a touch is going to feel deeper, a thought is deeper, takes longer, things like that. The second is overstimulation. We're much more easily overstimulated. Okay. So these are things like sounds, noises, anything that could stimulate your nervous system at all. Most people can access a stimulation, process it, and get it out, but word processing much deeper, faster, and smaller things overstimulate us. The next is we are highly empathetic and intuitive. Okay, so we are not just processing the world deeper and being overstimulated more deeply, we're also catching all of the energies, thoughts, feelings, emotions around us. And we also are constantly having these internal knowings, right? Which is what intuition is, that sort of govern how we work and live in life. And then the last is we sense subtleties more easily. So these are things as small as like the clicking of a pen 3 rooms over, or something like a change in temperature 1 degree, mm-hmm. or things like that. Subtleties of like the change of the corner of someone's mouth when they're explaining something to you and you see a shift of their emotions or their energies, things like that. You may see this show up in business in ways like you're easily overwhelmed. You have a lot of ideas, but you put them on your to-do list, but you can be easily overstimulated by your ideas. You can also have a lack of clarity sometimes because you're processing everything so much more deeply, in business and in life in general. HSPs tend to sort of swing on a pendulum of like overachieving or high achieving all the way to like completely avoidant, right? They avoid, and ultimately the HSP's goal in life and in business is to find a really good balance so that their pendulum swings much more less vigorously is a good word. Yeah. So where is your peace points? Where do you find yourself really like taking the sacred spaces to kind of do business your own way, to do life your own way, so that when you do have to swing into those busier times, you can kind of rebalance yourself much more easily. For me, we call that a reset around my business. When you change things in your life and get back to a balanced state, we call it sort of a reset. So you're constantly in this 1 minute reset, 5-minute reset, or a whole life reset like you or I have done, that launched these beautiful businesses.
Yeah, for sure. So in your consulting business, who are your clients, and how have you been able to build this business and finding these clients?
Yeah, it's pretty simple. Actually, my clients are highly sensitive people, other highly sensitive people who have reached a point in their business or their life where they're ready for a reset. They know that they need a reset. Sometimes the reset is big, like you and I, right? I closed a business. I, deleted my followers, deleted my giant group, my subscribers, everything. Or it's something simple like this offer is going away. Like I can't do this. This whole arm of my business is going away. Or it's something simple like I really need to relook at how I market so that I can better regulate my nervous system because I feel vulnerable, or I feel too visible, or I don't feel visible enough, so there's some variety there in how much or what needs to be reset. So I work with clients, specifically highly sensitive people, who would say these things in my business need to be reset. And what happens as a result of that, the ultimate end goal is that when they find balance, they also are able to reclaim the peace in their life. And that is really the goal of what I do every single day.
I think that's great. I could certainly benefit from that myself. So I have to ask you about this. You shut down a business, a whole list of followers. I know how hard it is to build a following, to build an email list, to build, like, whether it's a Facebook group or a community, whatever it is. That had to be difficult to hit the power button and turn that off, simply because of the time it probably took to get you there. Can you talk about that? Was that difficult? Did you have any regrets? Or was it transformative and moved you forward?
It's a great question, because the answer to that is yes and no, right? Like there's no real like in between answer. The answer is yes, it was hard, and no, it wasn't hard, right? Because you come to this point in your life, and maybe you want to call it a midlife crisis. I don't know. I'm going to pretend like I'm still 29. But with all of that said, you come to this point in your life where you have to make a choice. And when you know better, you do better. And so at that point, I had gone through this spiritual journey. I had lost what I now know was a narcissistic friendship where I was the codependent. I had lost sort of all of my capacity to people please, because I had gone through some of these real spiritual awakenings and growth pieces. And so I didn't fit the shoes anymore. Like every time I sort of tried to like turn the train or talk more deeply or have these other conversations. I mean, especially in the event industry where our most important conversation is which vendor gets to eat. I needed more. And so it was an act of service to myself, really. And so, which sounds strange. But so yes, it was hard because your nervous system gets used to momentum, right? It starts to crave it at this high level. But I had spent so much time really teaching myself how to sit still and to be slow and to rest and to ground myself into what I was doing, through working with plants and through studying how the cycle of nature works and all of those things, that I was able to easily let it go because I knew that it wasn't actually serving me in the end. And while technically I'm not working at that same capacity, I don't have the same number of speaking engagements on my roster, and I'm not sure you can really count that in this COVID age. But like if things were the same, I would definitely be working on a much slower business. But I'm a much happier, more peaceful human. And I take care of myself and allow what comes out of me to be an abundance of what I've done in work and love and healing for myself.
How did you find, this just kind of came to me, I have never really liked doing public speaking. A lot of people, that's one of the things that I'm like, ooh, it's way too much. Talk about overstimulation. Of course, I've had to do presentations and things working in the university setting, and being in front of a classroom of a lot of students, that never felt like the same thing. I was in my element. But if I had to get up in front of an auditorium of colleagues and that kind of thing, I felt like I was going to die. So how were you able to balance being a highly sensitive person who did a lot of public speaking, who was in the limelight?
Not well. I mean, I could lie to you. The thing is, I grew up with, my dad was a pastor, right? And I grew up in a world in which I was sort of life in a fishbowl, right? And I performed musically. I went to college for music performance. So I sort of had a persona that I could put on. I call it now my shell, right? Like there was a person that existed, another Kellie, that I had a shell that I could go these places and I would just sort of let this stuff not get close to me. And I had a persona that I would use that would show up, right? But 10 minutes before, I'd practically be vomiting in my shoes.
Yes.
And 10 minutes after, my whole nervous system is shaking, right? And I don't recommend that. I feel like new me, like I in this time, I've really lost my shell. It's scary sometimes, actually, because I feel vulnerable a lot more than I did before, but in a different way. So I often tell my husband, like when emotions happen, and he's like, "Are you okay? Because this is still new," I'm like, I'm okay. I don't have my shell. I'm not as good at deflecting emotion and dealing with it later. But I think it is important that we can, as highly sensitive people, show up into a space, be sensitive, be alive and awake, and also go later and decompress. And I think one of the things I didn't do in that world was I didn't pack in enough space for Kellie to be what Kellie needed to be. And so I think I definitely can and am doing it again, but I'm doing it in a much more boundary set space with a lot more room for self love and care and all of those things. And I just have learned so much more about myself that I can now tell an organizer, look, before and after, I'm going to be gone for an hour.
Yeah, I can completely relate to that.
Yeah. And so I just don't engage in the same way I used to. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. Yeah. I was just kind of laughing to myself thinking, after I had like big events, and as you said, you're getting ready to go to a trade show.
Yeah.
These things still show up for us, right? Just in a different way. I had been going to different events for years. The first couple of years of my business, really up until last year, until I opened a physical store to kind of take the place of going to all these events. But even doing that, I knew I loved them.
Yeah.
But the before and after was a lot to process. And I have 3 boys. I live in a house full of men and even the dog. And I would come home and just get on the couch and like pull the covers up. And when they were all talking to me at once, I used to say, nope, nope, I'm in the decompression chamber. I'm in the decompression chamber. So they learned that if I'm on the couch with the blanket up, it's the decompression chamber, don't talk.
Yeah, for sure. I've learned to be really intentional with what I choose. So because in trade show world, especially, and I'm a highly sensitive person, which means I have a tendency to be extra. I'm also from the event industry, which means that I'm good at design and all these things. So I don't just like put out a table. It's like a whole shop situation. Mm-hmm. So when I show up to these things, I show up fully. So what I realize is that if I'm going to show up fully, I need to pick the places in which I'm the best.
Yes.
Like to show up, that really, really intentional. So that's sort of how I've changed a lot of my behaviors around things. And I used to do trade shows in the event industry all the time. It was sort of my specialty. I can just see spaces really easily, but this business that sort of spawned as part of slow living, as part of herbalism, I've been so intentional about what I let in and like where I went. And so people are like, oh, I've never seen you before. And I'm like, yeah, I know. Cause I only do like, also like really, we sell soaps and candles. So like being outdoors in 97-degree weather is stupid. And like we're hurting our products, we're hurting ourselves, so I've been really intentional about kind of like being very selective about how I work on that stuff. And of course, now that I'm trying to put, Soapy World into business consulting and HSP, it definitely takes on a whole different turn. It's like, hey, let's work on this journal prompt, but also use this manifestation oil. So it's taking a whole different look that may not necessarily need a trade show situation. So I'm just kind of always looking at how does it best serve me.
Of course, mine has evolved that way as well. And I kind of think that it's the teacher in me too, but I've kind of developed a community around wellness that, even this podcast has become a part of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, not always about trade shows. I've made big shifts too, and that's okay. That's what our businesses are designed to do too, is merge and pivot and all of these things. So I guess I was going to ask you about how you balance running a consulting business with a bath and body, but you really are trying to kind of merge the two now.
Yeah. So the answer to that is sometimes not well. And what would happen is, as you know, there's sort of seasons, right? Especially when you're using herbs and you're, making things like salves, and you just have these plants you need to use or things like that. So there are sort of making seasons. So what I would find is I'd have this business season where I would constantly be on my computer, and then I'd have a making season, and then my content was all messed up and all of those things, which is one of the reasons why I'm working to pull them together. Yeah. And my, I had to realize that what is mine is going to be mine regardless. Does that make sense? So what is mine in consulting is going to be mine. I didn't have to fight for clients. I stopped sort of like constantly feeling like I was on this fish for new business. And I just started living out the manifestation of what I was learning. I started telling stories of my change in life and what I was working on. And, and I started sharing the herbalism and the information I learned in conjunction with how it's changed my business and my life, and for me, when you start, as well as I do, all of the stuff that comes along with owning a soaping bath and body crystal business is like an insane amount of stuff, right?
Yeah.
Everything in my house had to change too, because I couldn't just run this from my office, which is what happened at, my consulting office then turned into a soapery, which turned into how am I doing all of this at once? And how did these work together? And then the garage, and then, all of these things. So I really had to change my house. And so my house has sort of evolved at the same time that I was resetting everything. And this reset has really challenged me to combine and find balance by saying that what is mine is going to be mine. These products are manifestations of my emotions and what I'm feeling and where I'm at. And so they'll go to the person they're supposed to go to.
Yeah.
And I'll hold them until you come and find it. And I just changed the reason why I was in business really than just scaling and,
Yes.
all of those things. And what I found is that, it's a joy for me. And when I market from joy, then more people respond.
Yeah, I completely agree. So this is a question I ask everyone, and I love to hear the different answers. What has been your greatest challenge along your journey so far in life or business or both? And then on the flip side of that, what has been your greatest joy?
I I hope that you're looking for a deep answer because I am a highly sensitive person. So I'm going to go all the way to the core of the question. My biggest challenge thus far has been really recognizing how sort of little t traumas, which are really swept under the rug, especially when you come from a privileged place. I have all the markers of a very privileged upbringing, but underneath that was things like emotional abandonment, some religious trauma, some other, things in there that I know that my parents, now looking back at their history, were raised with, and that were then imparted onto me that I've had to, sort of process and reevaluate and look at. And in the middle of all of that, my dad passed away with COVID. And so grief plus business plus healing yourself, healing your business, that has been a big, huge part of my life. So grief, loss, those kinds of things are, really deeply embedded in understanding yourself, which is sounds strange because grief is usually outside of you. You didn't cause that, but has really brought up a lot of concepts around healing, and really healing these aspects of myself that made me an overachiever and a people pleaser and boundaryless, and that still I struggle with in my relationship with my mom, and all of these things. So I'm constantly checking in on healing those things that then manifest themselves in my business.
Yeah, that makes sense. So what would you say then has been your greatest joy in your journey?
Honestly, you're not going to think this answer because I should be telling you all the bajillions of money I'm making a month, but that's not what I'm going to say. My house and my children are at peace. My home feels peaceful. My children feel peaceful. The laughter and the joy and the neighborhood kids that want to come here because it feels peaceful. The way that I know how to get back in balance more quickly than I ever did before. The way that I am able to notice and be aware of my emotions on a way deeper level than ever before. Those things have been such a cool manifestation of this stuff. Watching them feel at peace and watching my kids recognize what it means for a mom to say, you know what, the way that we handled that wasn't really good. Let's talk about that. Let's go deeper on this subject, has massively changed everything about how we operate as a family unit. And that has really allowed me to flourish and thrive in other ways.
Very nice. Yeah. Things do change. I think when you're living your passion and doing what you're supposed to do, it changes everything around you. The same here. So I have one last question before I ask where we can find you online. Any books that you would recommend for maybe a woman who wants to explore a little bit more about being highly sensitive that helped you along the way when you were learning?
Yeah. So obviously the first, the stalwart of the HSP revolution is the book by Elaine Aron called The Highly Sensitive Person. So that's where you should start. Everyone should start there. And then of course you're going to follow your own path to see where does that go for you, because there are sort of new ideas out there about it. But then also I would say that for a lot of highly sensitive people, especially those in business, my favorite book is The Power of Intention by Wayne Dyer. Doesn't actually talk about HSP, but what it does teach us is that when we have these sensitivities, how to know what our true intentions are, how to know what the actual emotions we're feeling are, and then how to activate those intentions in our lives.
Very nice. Okay, so for our listeners who would like to find you online, where can we find you?
So right now you can just go to kelliedaab.com. It's Kellie and then DAAB.com. And then pretty soon we are relaunching all of our website product stuff on that site, which is super exciting. So right now you can't buy Bath and Body things online, but they will be available very soon because we're kind of joining those things together. And then you can also find us on Instagram at The Highly Sensitive CEO, or our current Instagram for our product business is Fleur Thought, at Fleur like flower thought.
Very nice. Well, thank you so much for being here and sharing your story with us. I'm sure it's going to resonate with someone and make an impact. So I appreciate that, Kellie. It was nice to talk to you today.
Thank you so much for having me.